Hello, and welcome back to my channel, Talented Reads. Today's video is my March reading wrap-up. So in the month of March, I read a total of 19 books, and a total of 5,194 pages. My average rating for the month was a 3.6, which I think is actually what it was last month. Anyways, let's get into all the books. So first, as always, for my horror challenge, this is a challenge in which I read a group of books associated with a specific subgenre of horror. I will do a separate dedicated horror wrap-up video for the books that I read in March. So let's just talk through those books really quick here. First is The Runes by Scott Smith. This is about a group of friends who go in search of some Mayan runes deep in the Mexican jungle and experience nature's wrath. Next is Devolution by Max Brooks. This is about an eruption of Mount Rainier, which threatens the survival of the small little commune. But they've come to learn that the eruption is the least of their worries. Next is Stolen Tons by Felix Blackwell. We follow Faye and Felix as they decide to stay up. I think it's Pale Peak, in a cabin to celebrate their engagement, but there's something out in the surrounding woods that's begging to come inside. Next is The Night Will Find Us by Matthew Lyons. Four friends decide to go on a summer camping trip in the Pine Barrens, but one of the group is there for other reasons, and the group finds themselves surviving each other and the forest. And the last one I read for the horror challenge is Halloween Fiend by C.B. Hunt. In this town, the residents are hunted by a creature they refer to as Halloween. When the sun goes down, Halloween emerges to collect the offerings that the residents leave on their porch. And each resident barricades themselves inside, and it's a rule that you do not make eye contact with the creature. But on All Hallows Eve, things get chaotic. All right. Next, I read some books for the March challenge that I did with my two besties. There were some tarot cards, and we had to pick some tarot cards and then read a book that's kind of associated with that card. And March was Women's History Month, so we were challenged to read books by women. First, I read The Bird's Nest by Shirley Jackson, which is for the Shirley Jackson tarot card. This is about Elizabeth, who works at a museum, and when she starts to have terrible migraines, her aunt takes her to a psychiatrist who discovers Elizabeth is only one personality. So I admit, this was not my favorite Shirley Jackson novel. It opened with Elizabeth at the museum, and they were kind of talking about, like, one wall is, like, completely missing because they're doing construction, and, like, no one notices the effects it's having on Elizabeth. But then it switches to this multiple personality thing, and, like, the museum is never brought up again. It was kind of a weird way to start, I thought, and also kind of misleading. And I did struggle to keep some of the multiple personalities straight. In the beginning, they seemed very different, but the speed at which she switched from personality to personality increased as the book went on. And at that point, it kind of all muddled together. And then there were a couple of side plots with the aunt and then the psychiatrist, and, like, I think they had some ulterior motives, but it just, I don't think was made very clear. And I don't know, I found myself confused for most of the book. Next, I read Big Swiss by Jen Bacon. This is for the Bees card, which represents kind of togetherness, and work. So this is about Greta, who is a transcriptionist for a sex therapist. And we follow her as she lives her life with her roommate Sabine, and starts to fall in love with one of the clients that she's listening to that she nicknames Big Swiss. Okay, so I actually enjoyed this. This was a new release that I wanted to pick up. It was one of my kind of highly anticipated releases, so I'm really happy I enjoyed this. Greta herself is kind of a weird character, and her and Sabine together are kind of wild, and, like, where they're living is very weird. Like, the whole situation was just weird, but there were a lot of laugh out loud moments in the book that made it enjoyable. And I think the quirkiness, you kind of learn that that's just kind of Greta and how she lives her life. So it wasn't, I don't think, annoying or didn't take away from the story. It just added a lot to the plot. And then the sessions that Greta was transcribing had me dying laughing. And I kind of want to be a transcriptionist now. But I won't. Next is The Night Swim by Megan Golding. This is for the I card, which represents, like, seeking answers and seeing clearly. This is about Rachel, who runs a very successful true crime podcast. She is currently in a small town covering a rape trial when someone approaches her about helping to solve a crime that happened, like, years ago. So this wasn't bad. I liked the podcast element, and I liked how the author ultimately kind of connected the two cases for Rachel, though I have to admit, the dragging out of the information regarding Jenny was a little annoying. And I felt that the two cases that she was ultimately kind of, researching at the same time were in two different places. One seemed like the pace made sense, but then the other one seemed like it was just dragging out in order to keep pace with the other case. You know what I mean? Like, it was just, I think it would have been better if it just made references to the past dates instead of making it seem like she was researching a whole other thing. And again, I thought it could have been done a little bit differently, which might have made for a more impactful plot twist. But with all that said, there is a second book coming out. I don't think it's a sequel, but more like just another case from this podcast. It's called Dark Corners, I believe. It comes out in August. So I will for sure be checking that out. Next and lastly is It Looks Like Us by Allison Ames. And I read this for the news card, which represented like anxiety, a threat, self-sabotage, that kind of thing. Now I'm going to read the synopsis because I think it does a great job at summing up the storyline. 1 week ago, Riley joined a team of 4 other teens for an internship on climate change research in the Antarctic, sponsored by one of the world's largest tech companies. It was just the opportunity she had been searching for, an escape from the ridicule she'd received after a panic attack at school, a fresh start. But their small team isn't alone in the remote, frozen reaches of the polar south. Yeah, buddy. I loved this. And if you liked The Thing, the movie and or the book, then this is definitely a good recommendation for you. It's basically a young adult take on that premise, but don't let the young adult fool you. It does get pretty gory, and there are some pretty creepy spots. And of course, you know, I love isolation books, so, I mean, this was just, like, right up my alley. And I thought the books had a good mix of characters, and, you know, of course, I love the creature. So I will say that I originally was going to read The Stranded by Sarah Daniels for this card, but I ended up DNFing it. This is actually one of the first DNFs I think that I've ever done. And there's some conversations currently going on regarding DNFing a book. DNF stands for did not finish. So here's my 2 cents on the whole thing. I don't DNF books very often, like hardly ever, but that's not because I don't believe in DNFing a book. It's just because I'm OCD about like completing something. And I very rarely am having such a bad experience reading a book that I don't want to continue. But my thought is, reading is a very personal experience, and as such, if you don't want to continue reading a book, then don't. It's that simple. Now, in my case, I wasn't completely hating the book and the reading experience. I was just bored, and I was at a point where I could tell it was kind of pushing me into a reading slump, and I didn't want that because I had some good books lined up after that and didn't want it to impact my reads for those. So I opted to just put it down and pick something else, and I probably will pick it back up at some point. But moving on, next are the NetGalley reads. These are ARCs, which stands for Advanced Reader Copies. First is A Sliver of Darkness by C.J. Tudor. This is a short story collection, which I think is the first collection I've read by C.J. She talked in the book multiple times about she's not new to short stories, though I don't think she's ever published a short story collection. So I hope she publishes more in the future. I really enjoyed this. My favorites were The Block, The Lion at the Gates, The Copy Shop, and The Butterfly Garden. Now, I did originally get this as an ebook from NetGalley, but I read a lot of C.J. Tudor and decided to purchase a physical copy to add to my C.J. Tudor collection on my bookshelves. So thank you to NetGalley and Ballantine Books for the art. This is out now. Obviously, you saw the book. It was released, I think, last year. So go get your copy. Next is The Real Life Murder Club's Citizens Solving True Crimes by Nicola Stowe. This is a nonfiction about some of the more popular true crime cases and the regular old citizens who have helped solve them. It goes through kind of who those people were and how they helped to solve the crime. So I thought this was just okay. I would say if you are a true crime junkie and readily consume your true crime, via podcasts, documentaries on like Netflix, HBO, like any of that, or even other books or social media content, then all of this would probably be repetitive for you at this point. If you're looking for extra information or feel like you maybe would have an opportunity or feel like you would be useful jumping in and helping, then I would recommend this book. This is a pretty good resource for that. And if you are one of those people that falls into that bucket, do yourself a favor and pick up a physical copy. There are a lot of resources that are just like listed in the back of the book and a pretty in-depth glossary in the front of the book. And of course, reading this on ebook, it was hard to kind of flip back to those and reference those as I was going through the book. I think that would be easier to do if you had a physical copy, and I could see myself highlighting and annotating, writing stuff in the margins, if I had this book. And I was actually surprised at the number of resources available for stuff like this, like the Doe Network and Project Eden. And I think Eden stood for, like, Everybody Deserves a Name or something like that, like helping put names to unknown faces and stuff like that. And this is stuff that real people have built in hopes of, like, helping bring answers to the families, which is so cool. And I will say there was a lot of people that this book covered, that, I know a lot about a lot of these cases, but I never really knew that there were like regular citizens behind it, and a lot of times, which I think lends to the credibility that the book was trying to say that, like, a lot of these people don't get the credit they deserve because, law enforcement's still sketchy about using them, that kind of thing. So I just want to say to everyone who has ever devoted any sort of time and energy in any way to help solving crimes, I so appreciate what you've done and what you continue to do. It was just very amazing. So thank you to NetGalley and AdLib Publishers for the art. This is out now. I think it was published in February of this year. The next art that I had was The Spite House by Johnny Compton. Eric, on the run from his past with his two daughters, comes across an ad for the Mason House in Texas. The Mason property, which is notorious for being one of the most haunted places in Texas, needs a caretaker. The owner is looking for proof of paranormal activity, so the ad is kind of for, like, all they need to do is just stay in the house and keep a detailed record of anything and everything that happens. Easy peasy, right? Yeah, not so much. This is one heck of a ghost story. So, this is different in a lot of ways from many of the ghost stories that I've read. I love that this is kind of centered around the theme of, like, anger over generations and how that learned behavior affects yourself and those around you, like, even without you realizing it or before it's too late. There was so much anger in this novel. And there was, a lot of sub-stories with the characters involved, but I thought it came together well. And Eric was a great character for the caretaker. He had a pretty level head, didn't really take crap from anybody. He seemed to kind of take the skid more out of need, even though it seemed like he was kind of a skeptic, which, of course, I love that for a ghost story. Now, with that said, there were a lot of character POVs in the story, which, if you notice from the book, it's, like, not a huge book. So, a lot of the chapters were short. Like, we got clips from some of the characters. And I don't know that was really that necessary. Like, the story that they were trying to tell could have been achieved without it coming directly from that character, And I was reading through other reviews of this story, and there is a mention of Eric, and he talks about his family house in, I think, Odessa, he was trying to earn the money to buy that house back and go stay there. And one of the other reviews said that now we need a story about Eric, Des, and Stacy and that house. And I completely agree. Please, 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 please publish that. That would be a fantastic story. Now I did originally get this as an ebook from NetGalley, but a physical copy came in a subscription box that I have, so I'm happy to have a copy on my shelves. Thank you to NetGalley and Tor Nightfire for the art. This is out now, obviously. It was released February of this year. Next is The Haunting of Alejandra by V. Castro. Alejandra is no longer, or she doesn't, no longer knows who she is. To her husband, she's a wife. To her children, she's a mother. To her own adoptive mother, she's a daughter. But she sees herself as more of a woman struggling with a darkness that she sees. I really wanted to love this, particularly because it was advertised in terms of the lore of La Llorona, which I absolutely love that lore. But this did fall a little short for me. And that's really because it wasn't a story of La Llorona. I think that lore is told in the book and it's referenced, but I was under the impression it was kind of like a possession, right? But it doesn't, after that initial kind of talk, it just, goes away. She was more of, I guess, kind of a background plot. It was more or less just kind of about the struggles of motherhood and, I don't know, not having the happy marriage that she once had. I don't know. Some of it kind of felt a little forced, but, yeah. Thank you to NetGalley and Del Rey for the arc. Actually, this one isn't out yet, but it will be released April 18th. All right. In my Nightworms subscription box, I think this was for April, I got Mothered by Zoe Stage, which is her new release for this year. This is about Grace, whose mother, Jackie, asks to move in with her, and Grace hesitantly agrees. Their relationship is never great, but Grace feels like maybe having her live with her will give them a chance to bond. But then the pandemic hits, and they quarantine together, which ends up being disastrous. This was okay. I don't know what it is about Zoe Stage. I have never given their books over a 3-star, but the writing and story style is kind of addicting, and it's still entertaining, and it keeps me coming back and reading their books. And this one was no different. It was just, I don't know, it's entertaining, but it never becomes quite a favorite. It just never goes there for me, Plus it was kind of hard to read about the pandemic again, but I did think that provided a great backdrop for the intensity of the quarantine and kind of what that required to carry out, such a level of paranoia and madness that both Grace and Jackie, ultimately kind of experienced. And, I think the real ultimate downer was that I just didn't really care for Grace's character, which, I don't know, didn't really make me feel sorry for her at all. So, yeah. Moving on, I read a memoir this month, which was Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. This author discusses her family, growing up Korean, trying to live up to her mother's standards. And then her mother is diagnosed with terminal cancer. And so Michelle talks about navigating through that and the grief that she experienced and how food and her culture kind of brought her home. This is a beautiful memoir. You can tell Michelle has really put her heart and soul into the book, and she approaches everything, even the hard topics, with such honesty. I also simultaneously listen to this on audio because Michelle herself narrates the book, and you can hear, some of the stuff that obviously she was talking about where, it still felt, and I guess I can still tell that it was obviously, it felt fresh for her, going through this all again. So, of course, this book is painful to read. I did shed some tears, and I think if you've lost someone to cancer, this book might be a little triggering. But I think Michelle talks honestly about grief, which I appreciated. I think most people shy away from realistically talking about that experience. One major theme is the food that Michelle and her mother bonded over in her life, and how she sought to create those traditional dishes after the passing of her mother as kind of a way to be close to her. And it had, although it was a very traumatic book to read, it had a really beautiful ending, and damn, did it make me want some food. All right, next is We Lie Here by Rachel Housel Hall. I'm going to read the synopsis on this one as well because I think it sums it up pretty good. TV writer Yara Gibson's hometown of Palmdale, California, isn't her first choice for a vacation, but she's back to host her parents' 20th anniversary party and find the perfect family mementos for the celebration. Everything is going to plan until Yara receives a disturbing text. I have information that will change your life. So I will say that I liked this book better than the one I read of Rachel's earlier this year. Actually, it might have been last month, called They All Fall Down. However, this was just an okay book. My biggest qualm is that the middle of the book drags. It seemed like they were trying to make the book longer than originally, so I don't know, there's like some fluff in there, and a lot of it seemed repetitive. And there was just a lot of dialogue that seemed to take away from the story. It's like, damn, these people talked a lot. But with all that said, I do have another book by Rachel on my shelves called These Toxic Things, which I still plan to read and am excited to eventually get to. All right, we're in the home stretch, people. So lastly, I have some buddy reads. With my friend Michelle, we buddy read 2 books. Jawbone by Monica Ojeda. Fernanda and Annalise are so close. They are practically sisters, a double image, inseparable. So how does Fernanda end up bound on the floor of a deserted cabin, held hostage by one of her teachers and estranged from Annalise? Oh boy. This sounded so interesting, and I noticed a lot of people were referencing this as like a weird book, which just piques my interest. But I found it confusing and even a little weirder than what I can enjoy. And weird, just like, I don't understand what's going on. Not weird, like bunny weird, but I don't know. Like, I can honestly say I didn't understand every moment of it. A little too lyrical. And I think the power struggle of Annalise and Fernanda was interesting, and the things that the group of friends were doing, I don't know, they seemed older than they were supposed to be in the book, which I don't know if that added to my confusion, maybe. I don't know. But I will say I did like the buildup of the kind of climax, and like obviously, you know, right away that Fernanda is being held by her teacher. So of course, like all through the book, you're like, how the hell did she get to that point, right? And so that kind of build up I really liked, and then the scenes between Annalise and her teacher were kind of intense. But yeah. Next, we buddy read A Dark and Secret Place by Jen Williams. Heather returns home after her mother's suicide, and she makes a discovery. Her mother was keeping in contact with a notorious serial killer dubbed the Red Wolf, who has been in prison for the last 20 years. As she digs deeper, she makes some other startling discoveries. Another just okay book for me. I did love the ending, but found that the book, like, up to that point was a little lackluster. I thought the characters, most of them were a little shallow. And the interesting plot developments were kind of far and few in between. So, I don't know, it seemed like I would get bored, and then it was like, ooh, a plot development. And then I would get bored and be like, ooh, a plot development, you know? Also, I did find out that Jen Williams usually writes young adult science fiction, and this was her first adult thriller. So I would like to check to see if she's written some other adult thrillers. And I would like to kind of read on, see her grow. And if she hasn't published anything at this point, I hope she does publish some other adult thrillers. I really think she could be a good author to watch in that genre. So, and lastly, I buddy read a book with my mom called A Prayer for the Crown Shy by Becky Chambers. This is the second book in the Tea and Monk series. Well, I say series, but I think it's just a duology. After touring the rural areas of Panga, Sibling Dex, who is a tea monk, and Moscap, who is a robot, decide to travel to the inner villages and cities so Moscap can finally get his question answered. Oh, this book. I think I loved this one even more than the first one. And I really hope Becky Chambers decides to bring these characters back because they are just lovely together. This book really does feel like a hug, you know? Becky doesn't shy away from painful moments in this book, but she balances it with a lot of tenderness and open conversations and just the kindness of others. I think it was a great reminder of why friendship matters. We listened to this on audio while we physically read the book, And it really was a great reading experience. I would highly recommend doing that for anyone who's interested. The narrator did a fantastic job. All right, that's it for the wrap up. Drop a comment below and let me know how your March reading went. Have any new favorites for the month? And it is on to April. Thanks for dropping by, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.